Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Faisal Abbas. I'm the editor-in-chief of Arab News. I am delighted to be back here at the Arab Strategy Forum this morning, discussing, I think, one of the most interesting topics of the day, future of Islamism in the next decade. And with me on this panel are two of the most prominent experts in the field. To my direct left is my good friend Ed Husain, who is author of the best-selling book, The Islamist, and he's an expert on Middle Eastern geopolitics, has founded a center for countering extremist ideology, and was a former senior advisor to Prime Minister Tony Blair. My other good friend is His Excellency Omar Ghobash, who needs no introduction. He is the Assistant Minister for Culture and Public Diplomacy, the former ambassador of the UAE to France and Russia, and author of a very popular book called Letters to a Young Muslim, which he has promised me a signed copy after the session. What Arab News has done in partnership with the Arab Strategy Forum is we commissioned a study targeting 3,000 Arabs in 18 Arab countries to investigate the relationship in the next 10 years between mosque and state. To sum up, let's watch this very quick video.
This year's protests in Iraq and Lebanon took many by surprise. Significantly, Islamist parties were among those called out for corruption and exploitation as the people took to the streets in anger. However, an Arab News YouGov poll on the future of the relationship between mosque and state finds that this was not at all surprising. Among 3,000 Arabs surveyed, Iraqis at 75% and Lebanese at 63% are the highest in believing that religion is affecting political decisions in their countries. Iraqis and Lebanese also led the way in believing that the Arab world would have less wars if politics and religion were separated. Significantly as well, 61% of all Arabs polled believed that our future would be better if economic matters were prioritized. Overall, Arabs have also had enough of extremism, with 60% of respondents saying extremist views have no place in Islam. The popularity of Islamist parties and terror groups are also on the retreat, with results showing a decline in favorable views towards the likes of Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and Hezbollah. Yet all this doesn't mean Arabs are becoming less religious. On the contrary, 72% of us describe our countries as very or somewhat religious, and most of us still classify ourselves as actively practicing our religion. Religion is also seen by 62% of us as vital for maintaining moral standards in society. Interestingly, despite the poll showing a preference for keeping politics and religion separate, most respondents rejected secularism as a concept and believed it would have a negative future impact on societies. However, while most of us remain religious and may not describe ourselves as secular, the study clearly suggests a bleak future for Islamism and a bright one for governments that focus on fighting corruption and prioritizing the economy.
Ed, let me start with you. I think there is, while the message is clear, but there is a rather confusing message. So the findings of the report, which, by the way, I want to tell the audience, there is a hard copy of the report if you wish to dwell into the details, which will be available outside after the session, thanks to the Arab Strategy Forum. Ed, although the message is clear, there is a shift towards a preference towards separating politics and religion. Yet, according to the findings, there is sort of a stigma or a fear of the concept of secularization, which essentially means separating politics from religion. How could we be having it both ways? I know for a fact that you have studied this different forms of secularization. So maybe you could kindly shed a bit of light on that.
Thank you, Faisal, and thank you to all of you for being here. It's good to be on a panel with you and with Your Excellency, Omar Ghobash. On the question of secularism, part of the problem here in the Middle East, the form of secularism that's been A, embraced and B, propagated thus far tends to be the French laicity model. And one of the reasons why Islamists, by which I mean those who want to see their version or their interpretation of Islam as a political force overthrowing Arab and Muslim governments and confronting the West and imposing a rigid form of dogma, by which I'm not referring to ordinary Muslims, but a very particular ideological force, they have used that form of laicity to say anyone who doesn't govern by their form of Sharia is in fact what they call, from the Ayyam al-Jahiliyyah, Gamal Abdel Nasser was attacked by the Muslim Brotherhood, Anwar Sadat was killed by an offshoot of the Brotherhood, because they saw them as representing something that was pre-Islam, and they link that to French laicity. Now, my contention is that there are various forms of secularism out there, and we were speaking on the phone yesterday. Her Majesty the Queen of England is also the head of church and the head of state. And part of the problem here in the region is that we haven't been able to articulate a form of secular existence that isn't seen as negative. In other words, the Islamists are comfortably saying, Almaniyin, and then attacking anyone who's secular, without offering a way to be genuinely Muslim, genuinely pious, and secular in the private space. And I put this to you, and I'll end this because I'm keen to hear what His Excellency has to say as well. But I put this to you, that it is hard, I think, for the region to say that we in the Middle East and the wider Muslim world are going to become French-style, laicity-oriented peoples. In other words, the French problem, the French Revolution in 1789, was a direct response in many ways to the Catholic Church and Catholic repression, anti-science, anti-progress, anti-women, and oppressive of ordinary Catholics. That is not the experience of most people in the Muslim world. Islam did not historically have a problem with a logical, science-based approach. Now, I think it's hard for most ordinary Muslims out there on the Arab street to go from being dominated by a religious narrative saying, right, tomorrow we're secular. And I think there needs to be a bridge. And that bridge can be offered by better understanding Arab and Muslim history. In other words, it's got to be something that's native, authentic, and original here. And my contention is that Aristotle, Cicero, Ibn Rushd, Aquinas all spoke about natural law. In the Islamic tradition, from Imam al-Juwayni to Shatibi to others, we have what's called maqasid al-Sharia, the higher aims of Sharia. And I think in that, there's something we can work with. And what are the maqasid? They are the preservation of life, of property, of family, of faith, and providing security. Now, if we go from saying, we're Almaniya oriented to we're saying we are Maqasidiyya oriented, it's an easier transition, because what you do is you remove away from the Islamists their claim that they are Sharia people. You take it away from them, from chopping hands and imposing gender separatism on women and removing governments, to saying we already have the higher aims of the Sharia preserved. We're already in Quran-compliant societies, therefore we don't need any more Islamism. What we need is the focus, and in other words, building countries' economic prosperity and providing for youth and thinking about the future rather than trying to go back to a medieval form of barbarity.
Fantastic insight, Ed. Let me go to His Excellency. As the video has pointed out, all of these findings do not mean that, according to the poll, that the Arab world is becoming any less religious. In fact, one of the highest figures was 72% of Arabs still describe their countries as very or somewhat religious. But here's what's interesting. At the same time, 51% of us support opening up places of worship for other religions in our countries. And 2/3 of Arabs supports women empowering decisions such as allowing women to drive in Saudi Arabia. So where do you think, thinking that just maybe a few years ago, perhaps if we've done the same poll, people would have assumed that the role of the government is probably should be determined by the religious establishment, etc., to becoming religious, but at the same time having this sort of tolerance. Where do you see this sort of change in attitude coming from?
Well, let me first say, I was a bit surprised when I read that 51% of the people who were asked were in favor of other places of worship, or places of worship for other religions. And the way I read it in the presentation was that this is a positive thing. It means that 49% are against places of worship for other religions, which means actually that we are still deeply intolerant in the region of other religions, which I think is very, very worrying.
Just to kind of interrupt, I would have to go into the details of the result, but it might not be a solid 49%. But it could be kind of fractured into strongly agree or strongly disagree. But yes, I do agree with you. We have 51% that are absolutely for it, and that means either a solid 49% or a fracture that are not.
And similarly, on women's empowerment, 49% say that it'll have a positive impact if we empower women, which means 51% think it's a bad idea, which actually for me is a really, really bad sign. We've got a lot more work to do. So I just thought I'd point that out. What specifically were you asking?
So again, on the 51%, 49% on the women, because I've happened to read the study, 49% is the highest figure, the rest are fractured.
Yeah.
But the question is, we are saying we are still very religious.
Yeah.
If you take us back in time, maybe 20 years, 30 years ago, people might have not agreed that they are religious, but at the same time, happy with their governments opening places of worship. So I'm asking you, where do you see this kind of change in attitude deriving from? Is it education? Is it the world opening up? Is it social?
I think it's partly a problem of what happened with the rise of Islamist movements, pretending or proposing that they have the solution to all of our socio-economic problems, and then demonstrating that actually they are barbaric and power-oriented. And so really that extremist movement was not a solution. There's still people who are going to be attracted to that. I think also the model that certain places in our region in particular have presented, that actually it's possible to be Muslim, Arab, and economically productive, forward-thinking, creative. There's a new generation that has grown up that has, some may say unfortunately, I would say fortunately, they don't have a very long historical memory. They don't have a deep understanding of their own history, and perhaps that's actually a way to allow them to be more positive about the future. They can move on and build a new future. I also think that the influence obviously of the internet, the fact that there are no longer any boundaries in terms of images, you can see everything and anything, and you can follow your own interest.
To your point, the study also shows a decline in popularity of religious parties. Hamas, Hezbollah, even terror groups as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. I'm going to take both of your kind of comments on it, but I want to start with Ed on this specific point. How do you explain that whilst we still have a lot of issues, clearly the economy in many countries is not doing well, particularly in Iraq and Lebanon, one would think that people would turn to religion or turn to religious extremism as a solution. The findings are showing us that they're not. Any analysis on that?
What has Hamas done for Gaza? And what's Hezbollah done for Lebanon? What have both of those entities done for what they claim to stand for, i.e. some kind of absurd resistance, or for the Palestinian people other than to make their lives more difficult? What did the Muslim Brotherhood do for the Egyptians other than to debate the lowering of the age of consent to the age of 9 in Parliament, and within a 12-month period, Morsi going of all countries to Iran? In Tunisia, the uprising has led to greater fragmentation. In Libya, we have a country split into at least 3, if not more, units, an unstable and a non-existent central government. And I think all of those factors make young people think that, why would we support these so-called disruptive forces? And then I think it's not an accident that people look to the UAE, and Dubai continues to be the most popular destination for young Arabs, and they say, well, here's a model that works, where you are privately pious, but the government is not taking a position on religion. I would caution against us dismissing our past only for the reason that humans, with all of our gizmos and gadgets and future orientation and robots and everything else, I think ultimately there's a search for conscience, there's a search for meaning, there's a search for history, there's a search for purpose. And unless we're conscious of the identity that we're creating, both for ourselves and for our children in the future, that identity will be created for us. And that's where I fear, unless we have an identity. For example, in the English-speaking world now, there's an increasing talk of the Anglosphere, with Brexit and the US and whatnot. Now, this part of the world has a phenomenal opportunity to create what's called the Arabosphere, the Arabic-speaking peoples around the world and the Arabic-influenced people around the world. Well, what do all of those people share, and what do they not share? And more importantly, what is their identity in the modern world? What does it mean to be an Arab, a modern citizen, a Muslim, or a non-observant Muslim? All of those difficult questions I haven't answered, and I really fear that 30, 40 years from now, unless we are able to articulate an identity that has meaning and purpose, that can guide us true to our own roots, true to our own history, then what we're heading towards is leaving a vacuum for Islamists to decide for us what our identity ought to be.
I think the audience should know that Ed and I have known each other for 14 years, and we've had many, many discussions. On history, I agree with you absolutely. If we wrote history in the Arab world in an objective manner, or at least tried to be objective. The problem is that most of the history of the Arab world that comes out as analytical, is created, is actually in the archives of the West, and it's created in the universities of the West. So if we're going to take history as propaganda, then we don't need it, I think. If we're going to take it as an object of serious study and analytical investigation and a search for responsibility and apportioning blame appropriately, then I think you're absolutely right. That would be very, very useful.
Omar, to Ed's point, do you think the UAE has coined or created a model for the Arab world where the focus is on prosperity, the economy? Religion is kind of sacred and it's kept, it's given its kind of right place, but at the same time, it's not interfering in political decision making. Do you think it's fair to claim that the UAE has claimed that territory?
I think that's a very, very good question, and of course the answer is yes. I think it's probably more interesting to look into how religion and politics actually interact. And I think this goes back to the question of secularization. Secularization is it's a technical term. It's got etymological roots. It's got historical roots in different parts of the West. And then there are negotiated positions between sort of people's religious feelings and their desire to see things actually executed in a political sense. I think one of the ways out of the problem or the question of secularization for us in the region is to say, okay, well, in the past, the religious class would have a great deal of say in how things operated in a particular city or in a particular state. They claimed a great deal of authority, and they were given a great deal of authority by people who followed them. Today, knowledge has developed so much, there are so many specializations and subspecializations. So ultimately, I think the secularization that you're talking about will come by the basic irrelevance of much of their expertise.
Actually, to your point, a lot of the respondents, as I said, the region remains very religious and a lot of people are practicing, but the majority would like religion to be a private matter and serve as a moral compass as opposed to, sort of more spiritual guidance to the countries they're in rather than sort of an influencer on political decision making. Ed, back to your point about the different models of secularization, from all these kind of indicators that we have, is there a set model in the world now that you think works best for the Arab world, given that clearly in countries, especially in countries that are now at a boiling point, Iraq at 75%, Lebanon at 63%, lead the way in believing that religion is affecting political decision making. What's the best model, do you think, for the Arab world?
I think the model is in progress. We're still suffering from the revolutions or the attempted revolutions of 2011. The underlying sentiments there haven't gone away, but what we've seen is a strong response to it that the desire to overthrow governments in the pursuit of a utopia doesn't work, hasn't worked, and won't work. And therefore, what's the future? The future is increasingly, and it's backed up by many polls, people look to this country and this region as to how do you maintain a leadership that's driven and looking 30, 40 years ahead, but at the same time true to your historical and religious backgrounds. But I just, if I had to choose a model, it'll have to be something along the English-speaking world's model, in other words, the American model, where you can talk about God bless this country, but you can't establish any form of religion. And I think there's something to be said for that. If you try to remove religion entirely from the public domain, what happens is you open the doors for the Islamists and other forms of extremists to say, we need more religion. So it's not to pay lip service to it, but it's just to allow for its healthy expression in the private sphere.
I have one more. I don't know if I have enough time, but Ed, I want to ask you a question. In 2014, you wrote a column in the New York Times urging Saudi Arabia to stop promoting Salafi hate and saying that it's fueling extremism. Of course, 2014, considering everything that's been happening in Saudi Arabia in the past 4 years, seems like such a long time ago. With the poll showing such a big support for reforms in the kingdom, such as women driving, lifting of the guardianship, the opening up of the country for international visitors, I wonder where your position now is regarding how these changes are affecting the overall Muslim world.
Look, I've got to be completely open and honest about this. For about 10 years, 15 years, lots of us have been speaking against Wahhabism, Salafism in Saudi Arabia.
Correct.
There's been a huge shift, and there's no two ways about it. Last December, I wrote an article in The Spectator praising the efforts of the Crown Prince. And I say that because in our wildest dreams, we didn't anticipate that Saudi Arabia would move from the level of its leadership so far, so quickly. And that has only got to be applauded. So and the evidence is there that the Saudi Mutawwi'in, the religious police, are now contained and controlled. The Muslim World League has a different form of leadership, that the form of Islam being promoted, at least officially, at the highest levels of Saudi Arabia, much more accommodating. So there's no shortage of good examples, and anything we can do to be supportive is what we should be doing. And I think, I have another article coming out this month in The Spectator, which is also supportive of the efforts of the reform in Saudi Arabia. And I'll end by saying this: the reforms in Saudi Arabia are not just about Saudi Arabia. They are, whether we like it or not, 1.8 billion Muslims look in that direction many times a day. And if they're coming out of Mecca and the images coming out of Saudi Arabia is one of modernity, of progress, of gender equality, of looking to the future rather than an imagined past, then all of us, Muslims and the rest of the world, are better for it.
Ed, thank you for that thought. Last word?
On a lighter note, as I was reading through your report, there was a breakdown of the people that you'd spoken to, and one category was martial status. And I looked at this and I expected some kind of description of what element of the army they had served in, but instead it said married with children, and unmarried. So I see that you're saying that marriage is war.
As I'm a person, I was a bachelor myself, I will not comment on that point, but there is a reason why. Look, speaking of things to be applauded, I think we have to applaud the Arab Strategy Forum for being such an open platform to discuss such a sensitive topic, which would have been unheard of maybe 10 years ago. And I would like to also applaud our excellent panelists for extremely great, thought-provoking ideas. And of course, thank you for our audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.